This game is so good at showing how, joy and love is always on the precipice of despair and misery.
Hi, and welcome back to Quest Markers. On this show, we talk about video games and the stories they tell with a big focus on narrative. My name is Marina, my pronouns are she, her, and today we're talking about The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. And this is actually the show's 1-year anniversary. So to celebrate, we are bringing back Kinsey, who was on the very first episode talking about Ocarina of Time, to, of course, come back and talk about its sequel, Majora's Mask. So grateful to have Kinsey back. Spoiler warning, as always, we cover the entirety of both Majora's Mask as well as Ocarina of Time. And a special disclaimer for this episode, Majora's Mask is a dark game with deep themes surrounding what can be interpreted as grief, death, and existentialism. We are not mental health care professionals. We're simply here to talk about a video game we love, so if this is not the episode for you, please take care of yourself and do what's best for you, even if that means not listening to this episode. We've got plenty of others, but above all, please prioritize your health. In this episode, we talk about the themes of dread, overcoming grief, pain, and despair, finding joy in the smallest moments, why Stone Tower Temple is, in my opinion, one of the best dungeons in the Zelda series, and why Majora's Mask is a game that can teach us more about ourselves as we grow older. This episode ended up being so long that I've split it up into 2 parts, so stay tuned for part 2 later this month. Thank you so much for being here, and let's get into it. Hello, Kinsey. Welcome back.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me back. I literally cannot express how excited I am to be here again.
I am so excited to have you back, and I can't believe that it's already been a year since we recorded the Ocarina of Time episode. I frequently go back to that one, actually, because you spoke about the game so beautifully and so eloquently, and I sometimes try to channel my inner Kinsey when I talk about games, just because I was so floored at how beautifully you spoke about the themes in Ocarina of Time, and I'm so excited to talk about Majora's Mask with you today. So,
oh my gosh.
To kick us off, before we get into your intro, what are you drinking? How are you staying hydrated?
That is, as always, an excellent question. I am drinking water, actually, from a glass tumbler that is Legend of Zelda, art. It has, a ton of Koroks and, a fairy and the Master Sword on it. I thought it would be quite topical. Yeah.
Oh,
so
I love that.
Here we are. What about you?
Love that. I, too, have water, and I also have coffee because it's my morning and your evening. So, I'm on coffee number 2. I'm ready, and I'm so excited to be here. But before we get into it, would you like to please introduce yourself for folks that may not have listened to your first episode, which, if you're listening to this, you absolutely should. Kinsey spoke so eloquently and so beautifully about Ocarina of Time. But Kinsey, could you please reintroduce yourself for us?
Yes, I can. You are just the sweetest with your introductions. But hello.
No, it's true. It's true. I'm being rude and interrupting now, but it's true.
No. Okay. In order to keep it moving, I will just accept this with grace. But my name is Kinsey. I use she, her pronouns, and I am very recently just starting graduate school. I'm getting a doctorate in clinical psychology, which is very exciting.
Yes.
And a long time Zelda fan. I think I talked a little bit about my history with it in the first episode. But love this series and truly can talk about it for weeks on end. So here we are. That's why I'm back, honestly.
I love it. I can finally preemptively start calling you Dr. Kinsey because I've known about this forever, and the world will soon know about it through your degree, but I can finally publicly start calling you Dr. Kinsey.
I think that's so fair. I think there's actually 2 stages when you earn a doctorate. The first one is like the widely known, whatever, you get a dissertation, blah, blah, blah. But the earlier second stage is when the sweetest people in your life, like Marina, are actually like, no, you're just a doctor already. So yeah, very proud
Always
to
have
say.
been.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I came out the womb. Yeah. Thank you. I'm very thrilled too.
Obviously. Besides Zelda, what are some of your favorite games?
So other favorite games, I've been really getting into, this is so boring. I'm really into Picross recently. And I know this is literally a show about like story in games, and I'm like, my favorite game is like the logic puzzle with numbers.
No, I love it.
But I've just been really enjoying playing those. I feel like it's a very productive way to wake up my brain in terms of like needing to get patterns going and da da da. But also, and I'm sure I mentioned this last time, always been a huge fan of the Fire Emblem series, Harvest Moon series, now Story of Seasons, classics. And then I'm really excited about Baldur's Gate 3. I have not really played it, but yes, exactly. I think that's how I'll feel.
I haven't played it, but it's coming to console, and I'm so excited.
Yeah. Do you ever just look at something from a distance and know that it's going to be a hyperfixation for you the moment you touch it?
Yes.
Because that's how I am with this game. Yeah, okay. I think we're the same way then. I know I'm not going to be normal after it.
No, I think it's forever going to change me.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, how do I wrap up the current things I'm doing so that I can fully lean into that? It's how I felt with Tears of the Kingdom coming out. It's the same thing. But.
I feel that 1,000%. What are you currently playing besides Picross?
Yes, I am still, to your chagrin, still playing Tears of the Kingdom, and thus can't talk to you about it because I need to finish the main story quest.
No, that's okay. Take your time.
I know, but like last time people said take your time, and it took me 5 years to beat Breath of the Wild, so I'm trying to do this one a little bit quicker. Yeah, we'll see. But I mean, who knows, but I think I'm kind of close. But I don't know. That's the beauty of the game.
Absolutely. I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah, please don't, honestly.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything. Well, let's get into it. I am so excited to talk about Majora's Mask because I think that it's my favorite Zelda. It's the Zelda that I keep coming back to when I think about what impacted me emotionally. And Majora's Mask continues to be the Zelda that impacted me the most and that left its mark on me the most. But I always say, I think because I love Ocarina of Time so much, I really love Twilight Princess. Like there's so many games in the series that I love, but Majora's Mask is just one that I keep going back to from just that sheer emotional impact standpoint. Mm-hmm. So maybe I kick us off with a brief overview of the story, and then we can dive right in. I love it. Please bring the masses to the beauty that is the story of Majora's Mask. It's so good. It's so good. I'll try to be succinct, and obviously there's a lot of depth to this game, but the story goes, in search of a beloved friend, Link stumbles into a strange new world called Termina, where the moon will collide with the land in 3 days due to a curse placed by the Skull Kid who wears Majora's Mask. And with the power of the Ocarina of Time, Link is able to create a time loop, to buy him some time so that he can live in this 3-day cycle and heal the various lands in Termina, Woodfall, Snowhead, the Great Bay, and Ikana, and free the 4 giants from captivity. He then calls upon these giants to hold the moon in place while he enters the moon to fight the Skull Kid who has taken refuge there and return Majora's Mask to the Happy Mask Salesman. Even though Majora's Mask is an item we're told was used in ancient hexing rituals and was therefore sealed away ages ago. So this is a vast oversimplification of the depth of this story. And one of the first things that we're told at the beginning of the story when we meet the Happy Mask Salesman and kind of learn a little bit about Majora's Mask is he says, "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" And this is a game that's gotten more popular over time. And I wonder if that's correlated to the fact that the game gains depth as we age and as we learn more about life and its nuances. And I think age is something interesting to touch on. Time is something interesting to touch on. And existentialism is something interesting to touch on that I'm sure we'll get to today. But I wanted to kick us off with that. This is a game that just has so much in it, and we can probably talk about it for an extended period of time. But I wanted to ask, where do you want to start? Because we have this shared Google Doc. Of course we do. With plenty of topics.
Yeah, I mean, I think the game being bookended by these two kind of speeches from the Happy Mask Salesman, I mean, like, Zelda always has some really banger lines that I think really define the tone of the game really well, right? Like, the opening line in Twilight Princess about the melancholy of Twilight, I think is so beautiful for that game. And I think the Happy Mask Salesman just really summarizes in such a scary and yet poignant and comforting way in the beginning of the game of you've met with a terrible fate is a very daunting start to a journey. You know, in Ocarina of Time, you're a kid and finally you're being acknowledged by the Deku Tree, who you've kind of idolized or who's protected you, and Princess Zelda wants to go on this adventure with you. And in this game, like, Link falls into an unknown, very terrifying counterpart to the world that he's known. He loses his body, like he quite physically is alienated from himself. And then this very creepy guy is like scolding him and saying, also, like, you've met with a terrible fate and now the game begins. You know, it is not the same exciting lead up into a big Hyrulean adventure. It feels much more serious. And I think that really also, from the get-go, when you see that clock and the 72 hours remain kind of tick down, it is such a different emotional experience, like, as a player. And so for me, I definitely feel like I could literally pull apart each line that he says in the beginning and the end of the game and how that really ties it all together so well.
Oh, I agree. And I think Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask in particular, and I would actually add Twilight Princess in there as well. Just, they have these lines where it's like, what is this saying about the rest of the story? But on what you were saying about the time is so big on the UI as well. It's always there. It's constantly looming. So if you're not looking at your UI, which, I mean, you probably are when you're playing, you're probably looking at the fact that the moon is getting closer and closer to hitting the land. And maybe we can start with this theme of time. You're giving this 3-day cycle, and you don't have enough time to do everything in that 3-day cycle. You have to manipulate time and control time in order to do all of the things that you need to do to free the giants, to hold up the moon so that it doesn't collide with the earth. And so, same as life itself, I feel like one of the themes of the game is you're almost grieving all these potential versions of you. Of, I only have so much time. I can't do this and this and this and this and this, unless you're quite literally manipulating time itself. And I think that there's something so poignant about that because, you know, maybe disclaimer that we will be getting into kind of more serious topics in this episode. Like, death is the only thing that we cannot escape. And I think this game is able to capture that dread, that existential dread and emotion so well. I
completely agree. And I think that's what, you know, so many people's memory about this game is tied to, oh my God, the anxiety. I only had 3 days. I didn't know what I was doing. But also the huge emotional payoffs of, I figured it out and I fixed this place and I helped these people heal. You know, a lot of people have really close attachments to various side quests in the game or really big moments in the game. Like, to me, when Lulu gets her voice back, which I'm sure we'll talk more about later, but like that really stuck with me. And I think, you know, Majora's Mask is such a macabre game, and yet it's all about how like life is fleeting and it's precious. And yeah, something can go so wrong so quickly, but also in 3 days, so many things can go so right. And I think it has this really, really beautiful mechanization of, you know, are you going to take agency in this right now? Or are you going to kind of be passive in your own life and what those outcomes look like in a huge ripple effect in your entire community?
Ooh, beautifully said.
Oh,
almost like the butterfly effect, right? How one action can have so many consequences down the line. And I'm thinking about like the really long side quests where you have to time them so perfectly in order to, for example, reunite Anju and Cafe at the end. But to your point, the payoff for many of these side quests, if not arguably all of them, is worth it. Ultimately. But I like that theme of taking action or being an observer, because within this 3-day cycle, again, you can't do everything in one cycle. And so it's interesting once you're at the end of the game and you're maybe finishing the last few side quests and you encounter some of the NPCs where you're like, oh, I know where you're going.
Yeah.
I know what you're going to do in the next 3 days is really, really fascinating to witness and just to bear witness to.
Absolutely. I more than any other game, which I also think is why this game has stayed, at least in like the indie game dev zeitgeist, as something to always draw inspiration from, is because this game is so lived in. You really feel like you have this intimate relationship with everybody in Clocktown, because you can literally, like, the game helps you mark down their exact schedule for 72 hours. And you know, that is so, I think back like to when this game came out, like that is honestly really complex, and like a lot of planning has to go into that and how they all intersect with one another. Especially, it really is like the poster child example of this, like the Cafe, I don't know how to say his name, I'll be real. Cafe and Anju, like their reunification is so, I don't know, it's so exemplary of this idea of like, something can go wrong, like if you forget to give her the necklace or if you don't mail a certain letter. Like, there are so many ways that they do not get to reunite at the end of the world, but also there are so many little ways that you can show like love prevails. And I just think, oh, I gave myself chills. Sorry, but
you gave me chills.
Truly, I don't know. Like, I just think this game is so good at showing how, you know, joy and love is always on the precipice of despair and misery, and all it can take is like truly someone else caring to tip the odds. And so,
Kinsey.
I don't know, this game makes me weepy.
So good.
You know, if Ocarina of Time, and I think I wrote this, but like, you know, Ocarina of Time, from my perspective, what I talked about in our episode, you should go listen to it, episode 1 of Quest Markers.
Yes.
But, you know, we talk about like community as this cornerstone of how Link prevails, because his communities he invests in come back and support him. And I really think this game is all about like how healing and compassion can heal communities, and how it is not such a grand thing sometimes. You know, he's defeating huge monsters and stuff, sure, but a lot of the quests are like, Link just was there and listened. And he helped someone find something they needed. Like, a quest I love is the one in the ranch with the Brennan mask, where you just help the little chicks grow old, because the guy there is like, I literally have no regrets about the world ending, except I wish these guys got a chance to grow up into full cuckoos. And then you play music, and you know, some little magic happens. We can hand wave that, but then you just bring him joy, and that's like so inconsequential. It doesn't matter anywhere else, and it's just Link heard out what this guy was sad about, and then wanted to give him that. And I think that is so emblematic of the entire game. Like, the main mechanic in this game, you know, Ocarina of Time is all about the Song of Time, and obviously that song is also very relevant in this game. But the other song that you play more than anything else is the Song of Healing, you know?
Yeah.
It could be named anything else, because it does a lot in the game, but it's not like the spell of, curse removal. It's not called that. It's not called like the spell of, I don't know, evil repellent. It's just the Song of Healing. And the so many different ways that you help people heal physically, emotionally, spiritually, and I got myself so like derailed. But I just think that's like the game's thesis is life can be so hard, but also it is so easy to find joy and reconcile and be with your loved ones. And the main thing humans do is help each other heal.
Oh, you're going to make me cry.
I'm making myself cry. I should have brought tissues.
Oh, it's so good. And I couldn't agree more that joy is found in the smallest moments. Mm-hmm. Despite, looming existential dread, despite grief and pain that we go through, that joy is and can be found in the smallest moments. Mm-hmm. But I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about, and if I didn't bring up the fact that this game has been analyzed through the 5 stages of grief fairly frequently. And I'd love to take the conversation in that direction for a little bit, and selfishly because I want to talk about one of my favorite dungeon in the Zelda series, which is Stone Tower Temple. But I know it's a little bit more nuanced than just saying that you systematically go through 5 stages of grief, and you pointed this out in our notes. It's very much a framework, but it's applied in this very broad context with Zelda. That you don't go through 1 and then go to 2 and then go to 3. You kind of feel these emotions throughout, and you go back from one emotion to another. You could probably say this more eloquently than me, but the locations in the game have been analyzed through the lens of the 5 stages of grief. So one assumption for the game is that the beloved friend that we're searching for is Navi, and I think there's kind of a heavy it's heavily implied that Navi is the person we're searching for, because Navi is also the only person who remembers what we went through in Ocarina of Time. And I'll get to that maybe a little bit later. But, if we do analyze Majora's Mask through the 5 stages of grief, and I'll very quickly go through this, the stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And we see denial in Clocktown, with many citizens refusing to believe that the moon will actually fall. And so, for example, you have a carpenter at the mayor's office, Muto, saying, "You cowards, do you actually believe the moon will fall?" The confused townsfolk simply caused a panic by believing this ridiculous, groundless theory. When you go to the Woodfall region, you see anger, with the Deku King being angry that his daughter is missing. And when you head to Snowhead, you see bargaining, with Darmani's ghost begging to be brought back to life through magic. You see depression in the Great Bay region, where Lulu has isolated herself after the loss of her eggs. And then you see acceptance in Ikana. And I think that it's such an interesting way to view the game. And I'll elaborate if you'll humor me on Ikana for a little bit, because it's one of my favorite regions in any Zelda game, and Stone Tower Temple is easily my favorite temple in any game, not only mechanically but symbolically. So, after Link kind of goes through all of these emotions and sees all of these emotions that are mirrored to him by the townsfolk of, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, all these like really difficult emotions, we start inching towards acceptance. And Ikana is quite literally the land of the dead. And within this region, you learn a song called the Elegy of Emptiness that lets you create these empty, lifeless shells of yourself. And you can do it with each transformation mask that you have. So Deku, Goron, Zora, and yourself. And you go through Stone Tower Temple creating these shells of yourself to step on triggers. And it's almost like shedding old skin and leaving the other stages of grief behind. And in order to get the light arrows, which to me represent enlightenment or acceptance, you have gone through so many trials. And once you gain this acceptance, you use the light arrows to flip the temple upside down. And you literally, you flip the world upside down in order to bring the heavens to your feet.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, this represents bringing grief that has been hovering above you, overpowering you, down to walk beside you. It never truly goes away, but it's being stripped of its previous power over you. And I think that that is so, I get chills when I talk about it because it's so symbolic and beautiful. And I am floored every time I think about the fact that this game was developed in a year.
Yeah.
Because, I just, that moment and that symbolism is so poignant. And thank you for humoring me as I talk about this, because I just, I love it so much.
No, I love it. And now it's my turn to be like, that was beautifully eloquent. This idea of Link having to finally truly like conquer and face these other versions of himself that are strongly informed by the values and struggles of each place he visits, right? Like he literally kind of assumes identities of lost loved ones in each of these, the butler's son, Mikau, and I want to say Darunia, but that's Ocarina of Time. You literally just said him. But yeah, like the lost Goron like leader.
Darmani.
Darmani, thank you. And so, this idea of Link is both shedding his own pain, but also the pain of all these communities and all these people around him, and in doing so, is stronger and gains access to new things. And if we're going to talk about, the Stone Temple as this allegory for acceptance and acceptance in death, acceptance in trauma, whatever it may be, the idea that actually, these griefs I have, this trauma I'm carrying is important and it helps me move. It's not a burden necessarily. It's a part of me, and how can I find acceptance in that, and how can I find value in that and meaning in that? And that's a huge part of this whole theory. This is my turn to nerd out.
Please.
So the 5 stages of grief were originally actually 5 stages of death, and it was about the experiences people on their deathbed have and the emotions they have, especially if you're terminally ill. And it was developed by Dr. Kubler-Ross, and before her, no one really talked about the feelings of dying and what people were going through. And it was this really breakthrough idea of these are common things that people on their deathbed are experiencing. And how do we know that? How do we meaningfully interact with that and help people? And like you said, like it's not about a linear journey necessarily, but about, people flow back and through these regularly, and it's been since applied to grief and other kind of models of intense emotions. And this idea that like we don't necessarily end up in acceptance, we go through a lot, but every stage of that matters, and every stage of that is really important to recognize and face head on, instead of trying to dismiss something as not useful or as a bother that we want to push you through. Like we don't want you to be in denial, so we're just going to force you through it. Like that's not valuable. You can't do that with someone. And so this culmination of Stone Tower is I think just so beautifully demonstrates this idea of, the denial and the anger and all of this pain that Link has had and Link has seen is important. And dismissing it wouldn't work. Like pretending it wasn't there or wasn't important denies everybody of this whole experience of what they're going through. And I think, I think this game could be about Link going through grief of Navi, like I agree, but I also think this game can be about Link experiencing like his own metaphorical death post Ocarina of Time. Because I talked about this a bit also in the last episode, but like, this is a little boy who went through a lot, and no one else except Navi will ever even know that happened. And I see the beginnings of these games as very similar in the sense of, as a kid, I was always like, why did we have to get all the spiritual stones and open it up? We gave Ganon the Triforce. Like, that seems like a big goof.
Mm.
And then think about that as, Link also, as a comparable age of when I first played Ocarina of Time, probably was like, oh, I made all of this happen. Like, I ruined Hyrule, and now no one will know. And then you see everything in Termina happening where kind of it's his fault, right? That the Skull Kid decides to curse the moon quickly and bring it down. And suddenly it's another apocalypse that's Link's fault. And he's stuck in this world that isn't Hyrule, but it looks like everybody that he saw kind of die in a timeline. And now everyone here is kind of dying again. And it's also, again, kind of because of him. And so I also see, like, you know what? As a treat, little Link can make up this entire world where everything is horrible and his fault, because at the end it's him working through his own grief and death about his life and this whole timeline that no one got to see. So I know, like, logically, like you said, it was made in a year, this game, so of course they reuse assets. That's so smart. Producer me loves that. But metaphorically and narratively, it's like, no, that was intentional, right? Like, no.
Good. Absolutely, yeah.
This is Link seeing everybody he cares about dying again in a different way, except this time, he gets to come at it through healing. And it's Link kind of listening to his own problems, right? To his own feelings of isolation and loneliness. And Stone Tower is this moment where Link is, if we're continuing this idea, finally working through a lot of his own stuff and coming to this idea of acceptance and love for all of his trauma and how that's important. And then this all ties back in with what Happy Mask Salesman says at the end of the game, right? He's like, I'm going to pull up the quote because I just think it's so pretty.
I know exactly which one you're referring to.
He says, he says, but you sure have managed to make quite a number of people happy. The masks you have are filled with happiness. This is truly a good happiness. And then he goes on to talk about whenever there's a meeting, a parting is sure to follow. However, that parting need not last forever, whether a parting be forever or merely for a short time. That is up to you. And that's his journey, right? That's him realizing he can go on. He has to leave Termina. He can never come back here again. But this isn't it for him. Link went through this whole journey here and experienced a lot of pain and a lot of death and is coming out the other way being able to move on from it and not having to find his lost friend, whether that's Navi literally or what she represents as, his childhood in the forest. Either way. So I love it. I love applying the 5 stages of death/grief to this game. I think it works so well.
Oh, that was... just the way that you spoke about that, I'm always just floored. But to touch on what you said, another question that I have asked about this game, and particularly replaying it as an adult, and disclaimer, I'm not a mental health professional, but I question is this game about trauma and overcoming PTSD? Because in Ocarina of Time, to your point, from a young age, Link fights demons and monsters, and he loses his best friend Saria, and he shoulders the world's responsibilities, and he learns that he's not who he thought he was. He's not a Kakiri, and he witnesses the death of the Deku Tree and all of this destruction, and yet holds firm in his resolve to bring peace to Hyrule, only for his actions to be entirely unmade when Zelda brings him back in time to before these events ever happened at the beginning of the game, in order to prevent Ganondorf from ever doing the horrific things that he planned to do. And so Link devastatingly returns to a world that doesn't remember him, where he can't even go home to the Kakiri Forest because he's going to grow up. And if you grow up and you go into the Kakiri Forest as an adult, you become a Stalfos. So everything that he worked for is undone, and he's left with these horrific memories. And now it's his responsibility to learn how to process that pain and terror and horror and grief. And so I think in a way, Majora's Mask can be seen through the lens of someone going through the emotional stages of healing after a traumatic event. And it's interesting because I feel like the way Link goes through that is through human connection. He seeks out community and helping others, even if, to your point, even if that only means holding space for someone and just bearing witness to what someone has seen and having people be heard. And I think that we can also look at Skull Kid's story in much in the same way, where he's someone who's been abandoned by his friends. And instead of leaning into human connection to heal and to understand where he went wrong, he leans into anger and wants everyone to suffer the way that he has. And I think painful events have this way of, like, innate way of contorting our spirits and turning us into people who are unrecognizable, whether that's, going through grief and sadness or going through anger. And that's explicitly told to us when we transform using the transformation masks. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I meant, at the beginning. We've already explored so many topics, and I can keep going on and on. And we will keep going on and on. But since we are splitting this episode into 2 parts, I really hope that you enjoyed part 1. Part 2 is coming later this month, where we will continue talking about Majora's Mask. Thank you so much for being here for the first year of Quest Markers. And whether you've been a listener from the beginning or you have joined us recently, I am so, so grateful that you are here. If you have any feedback, feel free to submit it. And social links, as always, will be in the description. I hope you have a beautiful day, and see you next time for Majora's Mask Part 2. Take care.